total piece of art.
Wow. All right, once again, welcome back, everyone. This roundtable session will explore how diversity and inclusion can drive economic growth by addressing workforce gaps and enhancing the effective utilization of talent. The session will feature local and national legislative officials, leaders from educational institutions, and community organizations who are, of course, pivotal in shaping policies and strategies to promote workforce diversity and inclusion. These stakeholders will discuss the development and promotion of the inclusive workforce development and its potential for building long-term sustainable solutions. And of course, participants will engage in meaningful discussions on the direct correlation between inclusive hiring practices, increased GDP, and the collaboration needed across sectors to unlock the potential of underrepresented groups, including women, immigrants, and BIPOC. This session will provide a platform for government, business, educational leaders, and community advocates to join forces in advancing inclusive workforce development. At the roundtable, we are joined by our experts, whom I will announce their names one by one. Please give them a big round of applause, okay? Thank you so much. And now, I would like to introduce our first roundtable discusser for today. She's a founder and president of Center for Intellectual Excellence, Dr. Hilda Fankah-Arthur. And for the second one, she's a member Legislative Assembly of Edmonton Glenora, Honorable Sarah Hoffman. She's a community builder and Edify Magazine awardee of Top 40 Under 40, Michelle Okere. She's an Associate Regional Director General at Indigenous Services Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause for Dayna Jongejan. She's an experienced Indigenous entrepreneur, the owner and founder of Indigenous Project Events. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Natasha, Delany, BA. And for the next one, she has a 15 years of experience owning and advancing the end-to-end value chain of talent and people programs within high-growth tech, finance, government, and energy industries. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand for Rebecca Lee. And for the next one, she's known for empowering human potential, dynamic entrepreneur, and motivational speaker, consultant, trainer, and mentor. Let us all give a big hand for Sanamani Yamiogo. She's the Chief Executive Officer of YWCA Edmonton. Let's give it up for Katherine O'Neill. She's an Associate Professor in the Social Work Department at Hellen University. Let's give it up for Dr. Hellen Gateri. She's an award-winning expert dedicated to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, in the workplace. Let's give it up for Erin Davis. And for City of Edmonton's Councilor, let's give it up for Councilor Knack. And of course, for the next speaker that we have in the room, a machine learning and a researcher, subject matter expert for computer application. Let's all give it up for Dr. Baljit Kaur. Once again, it's my pleasure to introduce the facilitator for this important roundtable discussion on boosting GDP strategies for talent utilization and workforce gaps. With her deep knowledge of labor markets and economic development, she will guide our conversation today, ensuring we explore actionable strategies for leveraging talent and closing workforce gaps to drive growth in GDP. We are excited for the insightful discussion ahead and the collaborative ideas that will come from this session. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Riya Ganguly.
I am loving the way this room looks today. Just a lot of the energy of being close and connected, and that sort of wonderful opportunity to think about and learn from these fantastic leaders. I just want to really thank Grow Women Leaders for providing such a fantastic space and putting these fantastic leaders in a room so we can talk to one another about an important topic, and certainly one that's on the minds of a lot of Canadians and a lot of people around the world. When I think about this table, so just a couple things before we start. I'll note that Sarah Hoffman is not able to join us today. Andrew Knack will come near the end of the conversation, and I think we have one or two other panelists who are not able to make it today, so we are really excited for the ones that are in the room. Well, the way that we'll manage this conversation today is we'll have about 5 minutes from each of the speakers talking about their topic of interest. I'll introduce the speakers, they'll come up here. But I really want you to imagine that you're sitting at a dinner table and that you're listening to each of these people and really asking questions like, hey, like, I want to learn more about this, and think about your questions as you're coming through. We'll talk to all of the speakers, and then maybe at the end, let's come and invite you guys over for dinner and have that conversation along with our panelists, if that's okay with you. Okay, so I'll just briefly present this topic today, and then I'll invite our panelists to come up one by one. When you think about talent utilization and workforce, we think about workforce gaps as disparities between skills, knowledge, and abilities. And this gap can arise due to a lot of factors, such as technological advancements, demographic changes, shifts in industry demands, and access. Okay, that's really important. In a study, one of these firms that I looked at, they started to consider skills gap in its workforce, and when we think about skills gaps, we think of anything less than 100%. And right now, more than half of businesses, about 56.1% of businesses in Canada, report skills gaps in their workforce. What does that mean? Well, according to McKinsey, as much as 375 million workers globally might have to change occupations soon to meet company demands. That's the chasm between what the workforce is today and what it needs to be in a few years. So what does that mean for us? And what we have today as a topic of interest is understanding upskilling and training to meet the needs and demands of industry. But skilling the workforce means skilling everyone, and that means access. According to the International Monetary Fund, closing the gender gap in labor markets could increase GDP, so it's like a bottom line type deal for our country, in developing and emerging economies by 23%. That is not insubstantial. This is a huge amount of an increase if we can ensure access to diverse groups. So that's really important. When we look at these findings, they also suggest that unhappy workers could reduce the global GDP by as much as 9%, amounting to a staggering 8.9 trillion. So it is not enough just to upskill and say, hey, we provided access. We need to create workspaces and workplaces that are inclusive and provide a happy and prosperous opportunities for our workers. Doesn't matter, and I would also say, from first-hand experience, at all levels. So that means at the very early stages of someone's career, all the way up to leadership, where it's currently not being seen as much. I can say that firsthand. Okay. So now I'm very excited because today we're going to be talking about some really exciting things that are going to really help us shape the next generation of our workforce. We're going to be talking about economic impacts of a diverse workforce, bridging workforce gaps through diversity, utilizing untapped talent, the role of policy in driving inclusive growth, development, and building a coalition to support the inclusive work development. The panelists have all been introduced, so like I said, each will speak for about 5 minutes, and I'll introduce their topic if they have one. So we'll start with Dr. Hellen Gateri, who will be talking about implementing best practices for inclusive hiring, addressing social and racial inequality in Edmonton. Welcome, Dr. Gateri.
Thank you, everyone.
The talking up there is fine.
I'll be reporting the results of our study that we conducted in Edmonton with racialized Edmontonian. And we were looking at employment and racialized Edmontonian. Okay. Yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I don't think I need that. So I will report on the third phase of our study, where we looked at how can we integrate anti-racism and EDI training in small organization and larger organization. So the survey that we launched, we collected 400 data, or rather, we had 400 respondents who responded to our survey. And what we found out is that people who worked, or individuals who worked in larger organizations with more than 500 employees, they were more likely in those firms to engage in EDI training. And what they suggested is that, or what they reported is that well-established organization and larger organization provide significant EDI training. And this EDI training creates spaces where employees and employers learn and discuss microaggression and some of the support mechanisms that most organizations can integrate in order to train all their staffs. The other thing that they reported is that providing training for all employees, educate the employees themselves and also employers. These are managers and also supervisors and also employees who work in those organizations. And what they found is that these activities create spaces where they engage in non-violent discussions and some of the legal aspects that employees can also get involved with. They also reported that workplace policies should also integrate workplace diversity, that is hiring employees who are also immigrants. And they also mentioned about sometimes it's very hard for new immigrants who are not educated in Canada to find employment in these larger organizations. So what they found is that a diverse workplace also integrates diverse workplace solutions and also increases productivities in those big organizations. The other thing that they suggested is that hiring processes need to be reviewed and accountability is needed in most organizations. And one thing that they mentioned is that data is never collected. There are no mechanism for monitoring and reporting who is hired and who is not hired. So in terms of boosting GDP and strategy for talent organization, most of our respondents reported that boosting GDP is also important to increase the rate of new immigrants who are hired in the country. And what they mentioned was that most new immigrants, when they arrive in Canada, their purchasing power is very high. So once you get a job, people are more likely to buy more products in the market. But then when you are unemployed, people don't have that purchasing power. Yeah. So it does increase the circulation of money in the market and also in other businesses. So the other thing they also mentioned is that better jobs means high performance, and people are more likely to stay within that organization because their needs are being met, and they're also hired in jobs that are aligned with their skills and education. So the other thing that also sounded more repetitive is that when people are hired in jobs that are related to their talent and education, their organization are more likely to stay more competitive because a diverse work experience also brings in diverse skills, and employers are more happy, which increases productivity in those organizations. Yeah. That's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fantastic, super fascinating, and I really appreciated the study because it was so open and honest. And I really, when I thought about some of the respondents, I think this is based on some of the work that was presented a couple days ago. It really resonated with me in terms of like these are practical solutions that we can implement pretty quickly, and we know that it's data driven. So I think this is really fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Gateri. So this is an area of interest for a lot of people, and I'd like to invite Dr. Baljeet Kaur to talk more about the future of work, AI, and human capital, particularly in the context of upskilling and reskilling. Thank you, Dr. Kaur.
Yeah. Very good morning, everyone. Yeah, I hope there is no one in this room who is not making use of generative AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, isn't it? We are all flooded with all these technologies nowadays, and like every one of us will agree that these things are impacting us. Not only our personal lives, earlier days we were using it for day to day things, but now they are impacting our work, isn't it? Yeah, specifically, I'm into IT education for almost 20 years, and I'm the part of that generation who had observed that there was no computers in the schools earlier, and by the time we became the part of workforce, everything education nowadays is not possible without computers or internet, isn't it? No, every business is now a lot relying on IT, isn't it? And it has created also a fear. Will IT take our jobs? Yes, like what is, even if I'm in an education domain, sometimes it fears me. Students know a lot. They have a whole in, like information in front of. They can access each and everything. What I can know, they can also know in this domain. So nothing is restricting them, forgetting them. What is, so how to survive in this world? Right? Not only being an educator, but also like if you are working in an healthcare or specifically people in IT industry, like they are exploring Microsoft Copilot with GitHub for generating, regenerating code, testing their codes, and their productivity is increased. I recently observed because I have been into IT education for almost 20 years, and I was lucky enough to have my life partner being in IT, working in industry for almost 20 years. So he is my case study. Actually, I am getting input a lot from the work culture I'm seeing too. Like earlier, every day he was sitting in the office, like in last before pandemic, yes. So sitting in the office is not a scenario for IT guys now. They are almost everyone is working from home, and by the time the business is growing, no one is bothering them. Do your job wherever you are. Yes. So unless until the productivity is not impacted, they are working from home. But in the last, since the chat GPT emerged, yeah, and many businesses have started using this generative AI for recommendations to their businesses, exploring it for the marketing, for the business ideas. Also, they have started using these generative AI model to provide context sensitive services, modifying, like customizing generative AI application with respect to the customization using RAG, retrieval augmentation generative services. Now, because whatever job was being done by a human being earlier is now being done by a machine with an accuracy, isn't it? Even the analytics that is provided by using Tableau or Power BI or other data analytical softwares, right? The amount of data they can handle, yes? So it is amazing. Like people earlier were you working on Excel sheets for a long day and coming up with the beautiful insights. Now These generative AI models are doing their stuff, and you are getting analytics on your fingertips and with a lot of accuracy. So, what will happen to the human capital who is working? So, AI is not disruptive, I will say. While like being an educator, I have realized like we have to use it in such a way so that it should support the human capital. It should not be challenging for human capital. Like we have to, like when this, looking into the agenda of this summit, like when we are talking about reskilling and upskilling, like people who are working for the businesses for a long time, they know ins and out of that business. So there is no point in moving them out and taking some other persons in with the IT technology. So my say is that we have to reskill, fine, same human force in the organization, training them that how they can increase their productivity by using AI in a better way. Like if I am a coder, fine, I can use generative AI, I can use Microsoft Copilot along with GitHub to generate a new code in less time. If I'll take a whole day to do that job, I can take only half an hour or maybe an hour to do that, but I still need the skills to see that if that code is right enough, is it easy to merge into the actual whole product, so that kind of skills are still required. Yeah, so we have to reskill the employee force. Like every organization has different requirements. Yes, identifying the gaps and personalized trainings. Yes, because generally the human resource department, when the trainings are planned, they are among the whole organization, but AI can check the capability of each and every requirement of each and every resource and each and every person, and can suggest the customized training. Like we all sitting in this room are different, our capabilities are different, our potential is different, our requirement for the day-to-day business as well as for our workforce are different. So there are courses on LinkedIn, or even on Coursera, even on Udemy, who assess you first for your capabilities, and they recommend you based on your requirements. So customized trainings, right? They can help the workforce to reskill. Even there are every organization is making use of Slack as a communication channel. Like Slack is nowadays integrating. Fine, it is capable of integrating AI tools for learning, which for looking at your day-to-day schedule, it can advise you like what are the courses you can take up, how you can improve your productivity. So the tools for AI can make your life productive, and there are new ways to explore more jobs into AI enabled domain, rather than having a denial phase of, oh, we don't use AI, it is a fancy stuff, or rather than fearing a fear, oh, can I do AI? Yes, everyone from every domain, fine. It doesn't require any technical background, and no prerequisite is there. And I hope every one of us can embrace AI tools to upskill and reskill ourselves. There is a motivation from inside is also required. If your organization is not doing that, then you can say, hey, I have used this trick in my work to improve my productivity, and you can share among the others. So all the best to all of you. Like if I have a lot more to say about it, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn by you know my name, Baljeet. Yeah, I would love to discuss how to use AI in your workplace to improve the productivity, not only for the business, how to explore your potential. Thank you.
Yes, I'm really big on time, can you tell? Very big on time. Because I think time is just so important and all of you are spending time here, so I'm really big on making sure we're all on time. Okay, so the next speaker is going to be talking, first of all, I just want to say that is huge. The fact that we're talking about AI, we're talking about how it's disrupting the state of our workplace, what's possible, you know, what we can do to upskill, some of the free resources. So thank you so much, Dr. Core, for sharing. That was fantastic. Next to Dr. Hilda Fankah-Arthur, we'll be talking about empowering women for economic growth, closing gender gaps in the workforce.
So thank you for that. So like she said, I will be focusing on empowering women for economic growth and closing gender gaps in the workforce. Empowering women to fully participate in the workforce is a critical strategy for boosting GDP. Although women constitute nearly half the global population, we remain an underutilized resource in labor markets. There is also substantive research that asserts that implementing gender-inclusive policy tools helps to substantially stimulate economic growth. This potential stems from empowering women and bridging gender gaps in the workforce, leading to notable increase in GDP. It's important to note that closing the gender gap in the workforce is not just about equity. It's an economic growth strategy that can unlock trillions of dollars in GDP and fill critical labor shortages in our economies. I would therefore like to share the benefits of integrating women into the workforce and the challenges that we face, some strategies for inclusion, some recommendations to consider moving forward, and some questions to keep us thinking about some of the ways that we can move forward. So according to McKinsey Global Institute, advancing gender equality could potentially add $13 trillion to global GDP by 2030. And in Canada, closing the workforce gender gap could boost GDP by $115 billion by 2026. McKinsey noted that companies with greater gender diversity are 25% more likely to outperform financially. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, highlights that women's inclusion in traditionally male-dominated sectors, such as technology and construction, can bridge labor shortages and fill critical skills gaps. The report underscores that fostering inclusivity in the tech sector is crucial to expanding the talent pool and enabling employers to adapt more dynamically to evolving technological demands. In aging economies such as Japan and Canada, increasing women's workforce participation is critical to counteract declining labor force growth. The International Monetary Fund has emphasized that Japan, in raising workforce participation by seniors, would also help close the gap, highlighting the importance of including underrepresented groups to mitigate labor shortages. Similarly, the OECD has noted that Canada increasing women's participation in the labor force is essential to address the challenges of an aging population and a shrinking workforce. These insights underscore the necessity of integrating underrepresented groups such as women more fully into the workforce to sustain economic growth in countries facing demographic shifts. So what are some of the barriers limiting women's workforce participation? Despite these potential benefits, which I have highlighted, there exist some barriers, first of all being the pay inequality. According to Stats Canada, women in Canada earn 87 cents for every dollar earned by men, with larger disparities for Indigenous and racialized women. Another barrier for women is the caregiving responsibilities that is often assigned to or associated with that gender. The OECD has indicated that women undertake a disproportionate share of unpaid care work, which significantly impacts our participation in the formal labor market. Additionally, several research have shown that women are underrepresented in high-demand sectors such as STEM and leadership roles, which remain dominated by men. Last but not the least, biases in recruitment, promotion, and workplace policies continue to marginalize women in professional spaces. So what are some of the strategies that women can use to, address workforce gaps, as mentioned? To address these challenges, governments are advised to adopt policy-driven inclusive strategies such as pay equity legislation and gender-responsive budgeting that supports women. Another accommodation is to adopt or accommodate flexible work arrangements, which is known to give women more time and more opportunities to work and attend to other issues in their homes. Additionally, is giving women the opportunity to build their capabilities and skill sets in STEM. Last but not the least is to implement inclusive educational strategies that would combat discrimination and minimize the impact of unconscious bias. Now, with some global examples, we have a lot of countries like the nomadic countries, Rwanda, and Japan, and India as well, that have examples of how women empowerment can really advance economic growth in a country. So in conclusion, closing gender gaps in the workforce is one of the most effective strategies for boosting GDP and addressing talent shortages and creating resilient economies. So some questions to take away and to reflect on as we think about this. First is, Canada has some initiatives to support women's participation in the workforce and to help address the barriers. But to what extent have these measures been effective? Where are the gaps? What is being done to address these gaps? Also, what measures have been put in place to ensure that these initiatives are equitable and no one is actually being left behind? Let's consider the intersections of the gender identities and those who are sub-marginalized within the marginalized groups. And last but not the least, how are we tracking progress of inclusive initiatives? Are we collecting data enough? And the people who are making the decisions, what is the evidence they're using to make those decisions? So let us get more pressure to get the right data, do the research that is needed to inform our work, and to make sure that we're being responsive based on data and the evidence around us. Thank you.
Wow, that was powerful. I thought, as she was speaking, there are so many important pieces to keep in mind. The pay inequality, 87 cents for every dollar made by men, even more so if you're in a racialized, marginalized group. That is a massive barrier. And I really appreciated the things that we can do to mitigate some of those barriers. So thank you so much for that talk. I'll now call up Natasha Delany, who will be talking about integrating Indigenous talent into the workforce, bridging cultural gaps for economic growth. And I'll let her decide on her focus.
Thank you so much. Just listening to kind of what everybody's said so far. So as part of my role and as founder and executive director of Indigenous Projects Events, the main mission is to help bridge the gap between enterprise and Indigenous peoples through experiences. I believe that we can sit in a room such as this, we can sit in workshops, we can sit in the many cultural awareness training programs, but if we're not having an experience, if we're not experiencing an emotional reaction to what it is that we are experiencing, then it might not make a lasting impact in changing our perspectives and beliefs about other people and about ourselves. And so really this conclusion was founded in my own personal experience of having to change my own identity and how I viewed myself older in life. And I know I look like I'm 20, but I'm 30, is that 8? Yeah, I'm 38. And so, having to rebuild and completely alter the way that I viewed myself as an Indigenous person and becoming proud of that, just even in the last 6 years, I really had to work on shifting my neural pathways, strengthening my neuroplasticity, and part of that was really by experiencing Indigenous culture and understanding what perspectives they had. And by they, I mean the elders and the Indigenous people that were practicing these ceremonies before me, and it was passed on to them. Being raised in care, I didn't understand at all. I had a very colonized point of view. I thought the way that I grew up thinking and believing the world to be was just as that. And so as I was learning the different protocols, the different ceremonies, the different ways of viewing our world around us, through ceremonies, through sweat lodges, through Sundance, through the teachings, my perspective of the world started to shift. And I find that it's this perspective shift and belief system and really the evolution of the mind that really needs to shift in terms of creating more trusting relationships with Indigenous peoples. And if we can't understand or resonate with a group of people, it's because there's a gap in our own beliefs and mindsets and of not being able to understand. And so Indigenous projects and events, one of the initiatives that I'm currently working on going forward and hoping to roll out early next year, is I am creating an advisory team of some Indigenous leaders, HR professionals, elders, business leaders, to put together a program for C-level executives, because I believe that change does come from the top down. Decision makers make the decisions, and so they're the ones that implement strategies. And so how can they implement some of these cultural and Indigenous practices within their own corporate culture? And so there will be, weekly workshop sessions, because that is still valuable. However, there will also be monthly experiential sessions where C-level executives get to experience sweat lodges and understand those teachings, or experience, going to a Sundance, or experience these land-based teachings, so that they can really feel into the change and the shift in perspective, and start to understand. And so the other part of this is creating some online modules where they're very specific to the 92 calls to action. And if you're not aware of what those are, I do highly encourage you to read about those and incorporate these calls to actions into their corporate culture through these online modules. So yeah, I just truly believe that beliefs can be changed. Our perspectives of the world and ourselves and of each other can evolve and expand, and we can break free from these limitations that we are putting on ourselves individually and collectively.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I think the focus on experiences, that's powerful. When we think about how we're interacting and how we're working, that focus on experiences, I just think that's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I will just let you note that we're probably going to be about 10 minutes over, as much as I've tried to be the best timekeeper I could. So just if anybody does need to leave, I want to give you that as a heads up. The next person I'd like to call up to the stand is Dayna Jongejan. She'll be talking about supporting the role of Indigenous women in the workplace.
Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. I want to acknowledge that we are in traditional Treaty 6 territory today. I want to say that I am not an expert. I don't have a PhD, so I'm going to speak more today, which is a very intimidating room, by the way. I want to speak more today from the heart. I'm going to speak a little bit more about from the teachings that I have given to me by elders, from my observations, from leading an organization where 40% of our staff are Indigenous. So a lot of this is from what the other women who I work with have shared with me. So in 2021, 68% of women aged 20 to 54 were employed full-time, but only 59% of Indigenous women were employed full-time. Yet those women are also they have significant purchasing power. They are, taking care of their families, not only their own, but their extended families. So they contribute significantly to the economy, but they're also what I would say is probably one of the most untapped markets that's out there is Indigenous women. But often when I speak to my Indigenous female colleagues about their past work situation, sometimes even their current work situation, and why they left or why they didn't, stay on with their organizations, they see that they didn't fit in. They didn't feel like they were heard or seen, and they didn't feel like they were welcome in those organizations. So what does a welcoming space look like in an Indigenous lens? Consider creating an Indigenous employee network where individuals who self-identify and self-select are given space to come together. Be open to leave to support traditional practices. The Government of Canada recently launched 2 days of paid leave for Indigenous staff to participate in traditional practices, whether that be hunting, gathering, or attending ceremonies. It has been November, our office has been empty because it's hunting season, and that's okay, because that's what we're there to do, is to support them. Be open to their definition of family. It may be very different than your own. Family to them is based on community. So yes, they will have many, many aunties, uncles, and cousins. Be cognizant that their home lives may be very different than yours. Many Indigenous families are still experiencing the ongoing impacts of intergenerational trauma. Few families are not being impacted in one way or another by the opioid and mental wellness crisis. Take the time to understand Indigenous cultures, traditional practices, and histories throughout your entire organization. A safe space means that all staff are part of the reconciliation path. In our department, all staff must complete 15 hours of Indigenous cultural training and teachings each year. And we were very fortunate to have elders and residents who support that, and it's something I strongly encourage if you're committed to reconciliation. Remember that Indigenous women for decades were forced into the shadows and encouraged not to speak out. Seek input and ideas through different means to respect those who have brilliant views but who may not feel comfortable speaking up in normal meetings. Don't make assumptions. Someone may or may not openly identify as Indigenous. Don't ask them to make the land acknowledgement or speak to their culture, or ask them to give teachings without first knowing their personal story and their journey. Many Indigenous people are only now reconnecting with their cultures and are not comfortable with being the token Indigenous person in your office. When hiring Indigenous women, think beyond the normal sources. Think beyond the big colleges and universities. Explore the many Indigenous colleges or universities, like Blue Quills College, just one, that we have in Alberta and across Canada. Explore programs that are certificate-based, like Northwest College. Explore schools in more remote areas where Indigenous and First Nation communities are. So I'm just going to leave it at that as a little bit of a takeaway to think differently, think outside your normal scope and I think when you do that and you bring on more Indigenous women, we're going to untap a major market, and we're going to allow, as we've seen the stats earlier, we're going to allow Canada to flourish. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciated you speaking from your heart there. I just thought that was so incredible and powerful, and so many fantastic takeaways for all of our organizations, so thank you so much. I'd like now for Michelle Okere to come up and speak to this very important topic. Thank you, Michelle.
Awesome, thank you so much. I was here earlier this week on Wednesday, and I was part of a panel discussion, and I noticed that all of the other panelists had notes. I was like, oh, did we get questions ahead of time? Because I was just coming here to wing it. So today I made sure to actually look at my emails and found that we did indeed get some information about what was expected. So I'm a little bit more prepared. My name is Michelle Okere. I am the Executive Director of the Indigenous Prosperity Foundation. And I'm excited to discuss how harnessing Indigenous talent can address workplace gaps in Canada. Heard some really great things from both Natasha and from Dayna. I loved talking about shared experiences and how that can really help connect us and break down some of those barriers. And totally agree in looking at different places and what the value of lived experience is. And as we think about job descriptions and what we're truly looking for in those placements. I want to cover, kind of the current employment landscape, challenges faced by Indigenous peoples, and then effective strategies for talent utilization. So, as many of you know, Indigenous people comprise about 5% of the Canadian population, yet face significantly higher unemployment rates compared to the national average. This disparity underscores the need for focused efforts to unlock Indigenous potential within the workforce. Many sectors, including construction, healthcare, technology, and natural resources, are experiencing workforce shortages. And there's a growing demand for technical skills, leadership, and entrepreneurship in our country. So we must align training programs with these industry needs to ensure Indigenous peoples can help to fill those gaps. Indigenous people encounter several barriers when it comes to employment. We have limited access to education and training, geographical isolation of many communities, and systemic racism and biases in the hiring processes. Recognizing these challenges is vital as we work towards effective solutions. So Indigenous people bring many values to the workplace. They have unique perspectives, cultural competencies, and they can help to drive innovation and economic growth. Utilizing Indigenous talent is not merely about filling gaps, but enhancing the overall economy and fostering diverse solutions. We can learn from successful Indigenous-led businesses, much like Natasha talked about, that have made significant impacts in their communities. So what are some of the strategies for talent utilization? First, education and training are critical. We need to partner with Indigenous communities to develop culturally relevant training and education programs and support for things like scholarships and internship opportunities to provide those pathways into employment. A lot of Indigenous people don't have the same networks that others do, much like immigrant communities here in Canada. The second is mentorship and networking. Establishing mentorship programs can connect Indigenous youth with industry leaders who can help guide them. And creating networks for sharing resources and opportunities is essential to support growth. The last I want to talk about, because it's near and dear to my heart and the organization that I work with, is promoting Indigenous entrepreneurship. There must be support structures in place for Indigenous-owned businesses. We know things like access to funding and resources for startups can help to empower Indigenous entrepreneurs. And if you didn't know, Indigenous people face significant barriers to access to capital, primarily through the fact that they don't have the same real estate to leverage as a lot of other people in Canada. So home ownership is a real limitation. I think there's a huge opportunity as well to highlight successful Indigenous entrepreneurs as role models to inspire others. I grew up rural and remote. I talked about this morning. I was at a career day keynoting with my husband, and I had no idea what the opportunities were. I fell into my career in the not-for-profit sector. I had no idea you could be a leader in this space. I knew a little bit about volunteering and programs that existed because we accessed them. But I saw cops and nurses and doctors and maybe a waitress, a teacher. I had no idea what the different opportunities were out there. And so when I went to university, I laugh about this now as I'm finishing up my master's, but I was the first person in my family to go to university. I was 3 years in at the end of my last semester when I got a call from the student advisor office and they said, "Hey, Michelle, you need to pick a major." And I said, "Do I? I thought if I just went here for 4 years, you gave me a degree, someone gave me a good job, a pension, benefits, and I was set for life." Like, yeah, unfortunately, that's not how life works. So that was a bit of a slap in the face. But I think that is really, really critical to have those role models to understand what the possibilities can be. So how do we do this? Collaboration in industry is really key. Businesses should be actively partnering with Indigenous organizations to create employment pathways. And corporate social responsibility really does need to be embraced and embedded as a fundamental part of business operations. When I talk about that, I really do mean reconciliation and looking at the calls to action, as well as, going beyond some of the, I gotta type this up, going beyond some of the more performative stuff. Government also plays a really critical role, so supporting policies and funding is needed to support and promote Indigenous employment and economic development. And I'll just really quickly tell you about the role of the Indigenous Prosperity Foundation. So we bring together donors, funders, and granting organizations to partner with Indigenous financial institutions and ecosystem partners across Canada to support underserved Indigenous women, youth, and early stage entrepreneurs to start and grow thriving businesses. We foster Indigenous prosperity by providing digital access, training, mentorship, and funding to Indigenous entrepreneurs across Canada. And we promote collaboration and cooperation of organizations within the broader ecosystem to support prosperity for Indigenous people across Canada. So I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about that or potentially partner with us. Thank you.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about this really important component of what you were saying, and it was a thread across. It's this opportunity for collaboration for businesses and people outside of this room to come in and participate and really be a part of the conversation. I am a huge advocate of this, given my career and some of the experiences I've had, so I appreciate you taking that on and bringing that to this table. I'd like to now invite Erin Davis to come up to talk a little bit about prioritizing equity, diversity, and inclusion in talent strategy and how we can close this workforce gap. Erin, over to you.
Thank you. I had the opportunity to sort of talk about closing that gap yesterday, and I made a just-in-time change to what I want to talk about because I sit at a place where I hear the same story a lot. I work in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space, and I hear about the gaps for women of color, for marginalized communities. And while I work every single day to help to close those gaps, I think there's a bigger role that we can all play in creating change. And so as Dayna spoke from her heart, I'm going to share something that I wrote a few weeks ago that I think we can take into both our personal and professional lives. In both my professional and personal life, 3 words consistently shape how I connect with others. Tell me more. These words guide me, especially when I encounter gaps in knowledge or perspectives and feel the pull of curiosity. They create room for deeper understanding and genuine engagement. Vital in today's polarized world where it often feels like we're speaking 2 different languages. At a time when our conversations about identity, equity, and politics are increasingly charged, I see Tell Me More as an invitation to bridge divides, a way to seek common ground rather than reinforce divides. It's easy to think that we're all on the same page simply because we're speaking English. Yet, beyond the surface, we're often speaking in ways that reflect distinct worldviews, different life experiences, and even separate definitions of what matters. These language barriers aren't just linguistic, they're cultural, personal, and deeply human. As I reflect on this mission, I realize how central Tell Me More is to the work we do in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space, or sometimes referred to as EDI. In EDI, there is a focus on human connection. We aim to bridge gaps and help organizations build workplaces that embrace and empower all individuals. But to be effective, our message must reach everyone, not just those who are already attuned to the importance of an inclusive world. This has been a key learning for me. I've found that too often EDI messages resonate with those who already get it and unintentionally leave others behind. And that's where the challenge lies. And speaking to people who aren't familiar with EDI or aren't even wary of it, the language I use must be different. Otherwise, I'm not communicating, I'm just speaking. There's a common perception that if someone doesn't understand why EDI matters, that they're somehow at odds with the concept. But that's not always true. Many people are genuinely care about inclusion, but feel overwhelmed or even threatened by the language they've developed to describe it. They may focus on their lived realities, wondering, how does this apply to me? What does inclusion mean for my daily life? To bring everyone into this critical conversation, we must consider how our words land with those who are still on the journey. That's why Tell Me More plays an important role. It signals that I'm open, that I'm genuinely wanting to understand, and I'm here to listen. One of the challenges I encounter in helping people with that diversity is that diversity encompasses everyone. We all have diverse attributes, experiences, and perspectives. However, certain dimensions of diversity are more visible or, in many cases, underrepresented. This doesn't make their form of diversity less valuable. Rather, it underscores the need for greater awareness of how we represent and speak about diversity. We must approach EDI with the understanding that diversity is complex and multifaceted. We need to move away from a check-the-box mindset and instead cultivate workplaces that value each individual's unique contribution. When people realize that EDI isn't about exclusion, rather about creating a culture where we can all thrive, the conversation becomes more welcoming. Words like Tell Me More foster that environment. They invite dialogue, bridge understanding, and make room for perspectives that might otherwise feel sidelined. Am I getting the, I have 1 minute, okay. In EDI work, curiosity isn't just a nice to have, it's a necessity. When I ask people, tell me more, it's not because I'm trying to debate or challenge them, it's because I'm genuinely curious. I want to know their story, understand their concerns, and see the world through their eyes. This curiosity is central to the work that I do in helping others understand EDI and understand it's how we authentically approach and understand how to make impactful change. I'm going to skip so I don't get the buzzer. Okay, so I challenge you. Make Tell Me More part of your daily vocabulary. Next time you encounter a perspective that differs from yours, don't react or dismiss it. Instead, lean in and ask, can you tell me more about that? It's a simple question, and it lies in the power to bridge divides, build understanding, and create a more inclusive world for all of us. Ultimately, Tell Me More is about stepping into someone else's shoes, even for a moment. It's about recognizing that our world is diverse and complex, and it's also what makes it beautiful. Whether we're engaging in EDI work, leading a team, or simply connecting with others in our communities, curiosity is the bridge that can bring us all together. Let's embrace it and make it a habit and see what happens when we approach the world with a genuine desire to understand.
I mean, there's not much more to say other than tell me more, right? And that's fantastic. It's just is so important to think about how we approach others with curiosity versus conflict, what we can do to really support one another on this journey. So thank you so much for that. I'd now like to invite up Rebecca Lee to give some of her insights on this important topic.
All right. It's really hard to follow the last few speakers. You are getting corporate Rebecca. So I've spent half of my life working with people. I've spent the past 2 years working in HR, startup tech as a head of people. And so I'm here to speak to the business leaders in the room. Hopefully there will be some takeaways for you here. All right. So obviously, I think we all recognize after the past 3 days, there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to both workforce gaps as well as talent utilization. So what do we mean when we're talking about these things? There's two ends of the spectrum. Gaps in that we know that we don't have enough people to fill all the gaps that we might have in our boxes and lines that we have within our organizations, right? Number two, once people are in the door, we also recognize that we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to activating that talent. So not only are we perhaps not addressing the barriers to people entering the workforce, but once they've landed the job, we may also still have barriers for their success in terms of future-proofing their skills or allowing them to bring their best possible self into the work that they are doing. So we've talked a lot about skills over the past 2 days, especially today. I've already heard things around upskilling or reskilling. Let's call it, we're already in a very much skills-based economy. Yes, so we're talking about skills. However, I would challenge that right now we're in this space in the marketplace where we're beginning to see some significant changes, right? So there's the gig economy, where people that are highly skilled, maybe in technical domain skill sets, have already begun to move away from the more traditional model of working for employers, and they're starting to monetize their skills, knowing that they are hot in the marketplace. This is creating the change that is forcing leaders and business owners to start shifting the way that they're looking at their people. We heard a little bit about the speed of change and AI tools earlier today as well. Let's just call it that speed of change and the need for us to embrace the skills required to keep up with this pace is no longer a nice to have. It's something that we absolutely need to be ahead of and start integrating into our lives. I know there was a call out around who's using ChatGPT right now. I myself have been playing with it, and I am a little bit heartbroken that the past 2 years of myself training, the prompts and making sure I've got these really curated ways of using this tool are now completely out the door with the new 0-1 model, right? The 0-1 model. Anyone else finding that, right, difference? And so at the end of the day, what we're seeing is this pace of evolution, this cycle of new tools that are coming into the marketplace. One, they're available for all, so no longer do you have to have a job necessarily or have this really expensive license to be able to tap into these things. But two, that cycle that typically was between 4 and 5 years before something came into market, they kind of solidified that process, and then iterations would come into play, has now shortened to a much shorter time frame. So what does this mean when it comes to the way that we look at work and what we do? I would argue that AI is not going to take over our jobs by any means, but people using AI absolutely will. Okay, so evolving the way that we think about our jobs, evolving the way that we think about what we do, the impact that we have, the results that we are driving, and how we do that work is a non-negotiable. How do we do that? We start to embrace that growth mindset. So how do we become extremely curious, like others have shared, when it comes to this evolution, this pace of change, these innovative ideas? How do we start coloring outside the lines and testing things and breaking things and embracing what it feels like to sometimes fail, but take the lessons that come with experimentation, maybe even inserting some joy and some fun into that process? At the end of the day, despite the changes and all the tools that currently are in place, I believe that the future remains human. From the perspective that companies and leaders that can get that focus on human experience right, and by that I mean getting trust and care right at the very core of that human experience, are the ones that are going to thrive and continue to create these really beautiful spaces where their talent comes into work, feels like they can bring their best selves to work, as well as put their best skills on display in order to drive business results for those companies. Thank you. How was that on? Okay.
Thank you, Rebecca. Those are some really practical solutions and some opportunities for us to consider when we're thinking about this topic. Now I'd like to invite up Katherine O'Neill, who'd like to talk about post-COVID landscape for women's participation in the workforce.
Good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here. So yes, I am from YWCA Edmonton. Our organization has been in Edmonton since 1907. One of the first social service organizations in our province, actually. And our North Star has always been gender equity. So I bring that perspective because since 1907, our focus has always been looking at, in the long term, are we seeing women, gender diverse folks, how is it going when we have that North Star of gender equity, and where are the gaps and where are some of the things that we need to keep our mind on? So after World Wars, Great Depression, all those things, we've always been like, let's keep our eye on the larger goal here. And I want to bring the perspective of post-COVID because, the research, and it's slowly coming out, and that's one thing I'm going to talk about data, is the research is showing a really concerning stat that we have lost. We are at 1980 levels of women's overall participation in the workforce in our country. So RBC, if you haven't looked at the data they've been doing, they're leading the way. So RBC, if you go onto their website, you will find this research there. And a lot of women just self-selected out of the workforce because of roles that, maybe at home, they were the caregiver, etc. So we saw a lot of women just self-select. but then also women being in parts of the sector of the economy where they were hardest hit with job losses. And the other really very concerning trend that we saw is that we saw a lot of women who were in leadership positions also be hard hit during COVID. And we have not recovered back to pre-COVID numbers. So they weren't already great. So to lose those gains that had been so hard fought for generally in our country shows that we are starting at a different level post-COVID. So I bring that because I want to talk about, when we talk about general participation, we need to look at the crosstabs, and definitely women's participation, immigrant women, Indigenous women, those numbers are really critical to keep our eye on because we know those are lower levels of participation generally in senior leadership positions or generally with women's participation in the workforce. So moving forward, we'd like to, and I think we've already heard some of this, but just focusing up on increasing capital, particularly for immigrant women, Indigenous women, women that have a harder time getting capital for entrepreneurship or for just generally being, setting up businesses, etc. Governments, different organizations need to focus up that if you've seen such a slide, and particularly women entrepreneurs, we need to focus up on capital because that is always one of the most critical areas. Without money, it's hard to do much. Second, and Michelle touched on this as well, increasing and rethinking how we, networking opportunities, sponsorships, internships, upskilling, scholarships, all of those things that help accelerate women's participation in workforce, and particularly women who have harder times potentially building networks, things like that. So governments will play a key role there, but I think the private sector, even not-for-profits, all have to think differently about what that looks like. Because it's not, I think there's very one-off programs, but there's not an intricate look at how we do that. When we're in the room, we would hear lots of different stories about accreditation and bringing our skills when folks come to Canada. And last but not least, and I think this underpins all of the key areas we talked about, better data. We do not have the research and the data that we have to talk about these challenges is spotty at best and not done in a way that's very intentional. So look to governments to help lead the way on that, but again, private sector, not-for-profits have to think about how we can call for that and kind of collectively share the data so that we're keeping our eye on the bigger issue that all of us are challenged with. So again, it's a bit of a reality check, but I think there is an eagerness to deal with this, and I love hearing from everyone in the room because I've learned a lot.
Thank you so much, Katherine. And it remains alarming to me, some of the statistics that RBC found in that study, particularly on women in leadership positions, because we talk a lot about workforce participation generally, but like I said to you, I think earlier, the importance of women in leadership positions is it's critical for success of our economy. Okay, I'd like to now turn it over to Councillor Andrew Knack to talk more about talent utilization.
Oh, good afternoon. Oh my, it's daunting to follow all of these wonderful speakers. I'm gonna take a page from Michelle on Wednesday and I'm just gonna wing it because I've heard a lot of good comments and I feel like the last thing you need is someone who looks like me trying to tell you the reasons why we need to have more women in leadership roles and all those things. I think you've already heard a lot of good rationale and you understand that. And why we need to have more diverse folks in leadership roles. So I want to actually touch on Erin's point about the tell me more, because that's really jumped out at me. And maybe I thought I'd give a bit of a perspective of somebody who thought he was a pretty good ally and trying to really embrace that world and realized that I had still so much to learn and so much to do. So I've been on council now for 11 years. And when I first started on council, I was elected my first term we had one woman on council, Councillor Bev Esslinger, and when I got re-elected in my second term, a second woman joined, Councillor Sarah Hamilton. So I had been working predominantly in environments of folks that looked like me, not just on council, but in my previous life when I was going through university, it was always people that looked like me, in different age demographics, but pretty much always people that looked like me. And so this last election was the first time that we had a majority of women elected to city council and 4 of the 13 members from Indigenous or racialized backgrounds. And what I learned in the last 3 years, I've talked about this over and over again, is that I've learned more in 3 years than I have at least in my first 8 years, if not most of my life, because I was in a different environment surrounded by people who didn't always look like me. And that's been phenomenal for me. It's been hard to realize how stupid you are too, though, at times, because I have been stupid at times. There are things that some of my colleagues have said that they've engaged on, that they've brought forward, that just no matter how hard I've tried to reach out to everyone possible, them bringing their lived experience, their networks, their communities, is something that I still didn't know about or didn't know enough about. And so, yeah, when I think about the Tell Me More piece, it rings true, because so I want to just give you the experience of somebody who is in that role or who was in that position, and I will always be in that position, because as mentioned, it's hard. It's and I don't want you to have sympathy for me, because most of my life, I have a lot of privilege. I've had a lot of things because of what I look like and who I am. But I just want you to have a sense of sort of what we're running up against, because I think for me, you get defensive when that comes forward right away. Even if you go into it with the right heart, I'd love to think that I was an ally. I'm doing all these things, and I was like, this is right. We're building up diverse representation. We're trying to encourage people from diverse backgrounds to be leaders in our city. And yet still, when people started to actually call you out and in a relatively respectful way, you get defensive first instead of taking a step back and realizing that actually this is just designed to help me make sure I have a better understanding of what I'm dealing with, to try to make a more informed decision. And I've seen in my time on council in this term and now in other roles that folks like me can either take that well or take it really poorly. And again, I don't necessarily have sympathy for the people who are taking it poorly, who come from backgrounds like mine. But that is something that we're running up against, is that there's a feeling of a threatening, of a loss of something. And I'll give one specific example, because I have a very short amount of time, is that I actually was knocking on the doors a couple months ago, talked to a 80-year-old gentleman, and he spent most of the time at the door telling me about all the things, like he felt like he's losing all of his rights, or he's losing everything to the world of DEI. And then I asked, well, what specifically have you lost? Can you tell me a little bit about that? And then as we went on, we realized that maybe there wasn't quite that same loss. It's just maybe an awakening or an opening of one's mind that has helped them, helped me in particular, learn what I didn't know. But that type of personality, that type of perspective exists a lot still. And again, I'm not asking you to have sympathy, because many of the folks in this room feels like you're often the ones that we put the work on to try to convince folks like me why we have to create more diverse environments. It's actually on me and others to do it. But I just wanted you to sort of have that perspective of sometimes when you run into those conversations, that's what we are running up against. And I think with the very few seconds I'll say is just the last thing I would mention is that for me, what I've genuinely learned, and I think one of my colleagues in particular, I won't name her, because she, about a year into this term, she called me out respectfully, behind closed doors, and she did it with the right heart in the right place. And I'm glad I had an open enough mind to be willing to hear that, to learn what I wasn't doing right, and how I could be better. But it's because of that, it's allowed me to perform in a much better way, to make more informed decisions, to genuinely hear those and seek out those in a better way, instead of asking everyone to come to me to learn. how do I go out better and engage those who have a different background, a different perspective, to make sure I'm bringing that back instead of asking people to come to me. So I think I'm out of time, but appreciate the chance to come and share a little bit about that. Sorry for winging it there on the fly, but I was just it's really enjoying the dialogue I've been hearing, so thought I'd offer that perspective.
I just have to say I've had a really incredible career where I've worked with a number of people who have held office or have been in political roles, and I really appreciated your authenticity and just being so vulnerable and sharing such a fantastic experience with us. Thank you so much for that, Councillor Knack. We're very lucky to have leaders like this in our city. So I have a question for you now. So we're about 15 minutes over time, and it's kind of lunchtime-ish. So we have a bit of an option. I'll do a little bit of a debrief remark, and then maybe if you want, we can have some opportunity for you to interact directly with the panelists and connect with them and be a part of this over a meal or a little bit of a discussion. I've been in a lot of these sessions, and they're generally male dominated, and it's like someone takes the mic and they'll just run with it, and I don't want to do that. So what I will say is I hope you enjoyed this fantastic panel session. I have rarely seen such a powerful group of women come together and discuss such an important topic like productivity, GDP, and how equal participation in the workforce can, in fact, improve all the things that Canada is currently looking for: productivity, better outcomes, opportunities for talent utilization, all the things that we've been talking about. I'm really excited for you guys to tell us more about your experiences, the things that matter to you, as we embark on this journey together to think about a more inclusive future. So I'm done with the mic, and I will leave it to you. I encourage you to have this discussion with the panelists, and have a really great rest of today. Thank you.